that has been taken away. Women don't even get any. It is the men that are recognized as the head of households and the holders of land titles that get that paltry sum. So when family lands are being taken away and the man gets only a little and the woman is not even asked how she's being impacted, it means everything is being taken away. Water has been polluted over the years. We drink polluted water. The rivers, the creeks, the streams are being polluted. The UNEP report on Ogoni said that both surface and underground water contains benzene, a toxic substance, 900 times above the guidelines of World Health Organization. So it means in the Niger Delta, all of us are vulnerable and women are more impacted because when they lose family members, when family members are sick, it is women that provide the care work and they are not paid for this. And nobody is recognizing the services that women are providing to start to hold families together. We are also losing, there is also increased rate of cancer in the Niger Delta. Women also came up with the fact that every day we see banners of obituaries. It has even overtaken every other public enlightenment activities in the Niger Delta. You enter communities, you are seeing banners of people as if we are celebrating life, but we are actually crying that we are losing younger persons, young men, young women, we are losing our fathers. We are even, every day that we live in the Niger Delta is like a privilege that you have lived another day. We are losing children. We are also, the unborn children in the womb are also being impacted. That is what we have lost. And how can the advanced countries actually pay for these losses that I have mentioned and many others that I have not mentioned? How do we even begin to calculate what has been lost and what has been damaged? Thank you.
What can we say to that? Preliminary conclusion is that the COP itself is lost and damaged and needs to be rescued and brought back to life. And so South Africa provides very big inspiration for those of us campaigning against fossil fuel expansion. For months they've been in the courts, they've been on the coastlines resisting seismic activities by oil corporations who want to drill for oil and gas all across Africa. So let me bring in Thabo Sibeko of Earthlife Africa, Johannesburg, to take the floor now.
I greet you all. Yes, my name is Thabo Sibeko from Earthlife Africa, South Africa. We have seen it all. We have seen that the fossil fuel project have brought nothing in our country but a blanket of misfortunes. We work with the marginalized communities, and we have seen how communities don't have access for water, and also a lot of restrictions in the areas where they're supposed to access to practice rituals or to access their heritage sites. So for decades, oil, gas, and coal mega projects have proven to be the major contributing factors to global warming and climate change. These projects have done nothing but to strip human life dignity and violate our constitutional rights. The IPCC reports iterates that we decarbonize or perish, and that has to be done within some degree of speed to avoid further climate catastrophic events. We demand the stringent policies and stricter laws complemented by enforcement against these oil, gas, and coal companies who are responsible for the damage of our environment and the loss of the life due to the oil fracking, coal mining in local communities. We demand for reparations due to the energy and climate change and climate violence and crime in local communities as a result of these coal mega projects. We also call for the finance institutions, including Africa Development Bank, World Bank, BRICS, and others to divest from fossil fuel, and invest on low carbon development projects such as renewable energy, because renewable energy are actually claiming a lion's share in response to climate change. So I think I would leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Thabo. And you must all have heard about the East African crude oil pipeline that is designed to carry heavy crude from Uganda to the coast of Tanzania. Now that pipeline is illustrative of the exploitation of African continent. Almost all the infrastructure from resource-rich regions are taken to the seaports for export, not for use on the continent. So don't believe what politicians say, that they want to extract oil and gas to develop Africa. It's all for export. Africa remains without the energy that is needed, and so that argument is totally false. It compounds the damage and the losses. But now let's hear from a man who is fighting for communities who've been displaced in Uganda for construction of refineries that will be refining heavy crude. I was in the communities recently, and what I saw broke my heart. And I'm an expert I've been seeing terrible things, but I saw really heartbreaking stuff in Uganda. Now, Comrade Innocent, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name's Tumwebaze Innocent from Uganda, from the Albertine region, working with Oil Refineries Association. Lost and damaged. I want first to make this statement that in Africa, we need to agree that people settle in areas depending on the climate, the environment that favors their activities and their habitats. Now, for the extractive industry, doesn't respect that. Myself, I'm part of the community that was affected by the land acquisition of the oil refinery, and then settled somewhere. Some people were given cash, and the population was totaling 7,118 people. We know our country is a young country, a country full of youth, but remember, no youth owns a property, most of them. So it interfered with our benefits that we used to get from our parents, that most of my age mates had to step out of the schools for 8 years until these people were relocated somewhere. And for those ones that opted for cash, right now they are landless because of being compensated with peanuts. And another challenge is that the compensation itself or relocation affected our culture, our heritage, because as Nemo said, when they visited there, in Africa, it is very hard to find a settlement, people in settlements, whereby a distance from the first home to our next home, it is only 2 meters. And these are families that have more than 30, 20 members in homes with a 3-bedroom house. It's really very hard for the people to stay in that settlement, but otherwise, because you don't have what to do, and already the land have been taken away, being protected by army, by police, any sort of security. And when we come up to talk about the injustices that we encounter, we are being harassed, beaten up. Myself in 2013, I was beaten up and put on gunpoint. So it is really very alarming. And then I have a question, that what do economists really consider in calculating the formulas they use to calculate a sacred site? Because we are neighboring communities that are on the left side, that their cultural sites were affected by the construction of the oil wells. Now somebody says, I'm compensating a cultural site. What do you depend on to determine the value of a sacred site? So our nature, our environment is being destroyed. The game parks are they are constructing access roads to the oil wells, of which it is now destabilizing the animals in a wave movement. Our community that was relocated to another area, the resources we used to get from the other first land that we had, it's very hard to get them there. The climate, the environment is totally different from what we used to have. The soils are very different. And this is a community of only farmers. No one has our office work. The only economic activity we do is farming, and we get everything from garden. Now, once we have difficulties in a way of maintaining that livelihood, it is very hard because the rains are no longer raining daily the way it used to rain, because the environment is changing because of the degradation that is taking place of this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Innocent. And in fact, he raised a very vital question. How do you value the loss of sacred sites? How do you value the loss of your culture? How do you value the loss of life? How can you pay for that? This is a big question that cannot be ignored. So we have a few minutes left, and we'll take one or two or half questions. All right.
Hi, thanks. My name is Megan Rowling. I work for Reuters, the charitable part of Reuters News. And I just wanted to see if you could make a connection between, you know, the loss and damage that you've been talking about on the ground in your own communities and what's happening here at the COP, because whether or not there is a loss and damage funding facility set up here or some kind of windfall tax at the global level on fossil fuels, what is most important in terms of getting that money to the people that you are talking to every day? Because even if we do have a global fund, sometimes that money does not trickle down. So what for you would be the best way to get the reparations to the people who need it the most? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I'm going to defer to Ika to respond to that.
It definitely starts from a place of power. Even that fund, it's being set up from a place of no power to the people who are supposed to be paid. So I think the fact that it is given as if it is charity, not recognizing that it is an injustice that is being paid for. It's like sending someone to jail and paying them while they're still in jail. So we're still in jail because the power dynamics, the contracts that are being signed, as it is, they continue to sign bilaterals with the places that they have damaged in a way that continues to extract from there. So I think in the first place, while it may be important, but if the mechanism, the financial infrastructure that is used is again from a place of power from the polluter, then we are constantly, forgive my language, screwed.
And without being dictatorial, let me just lift up this all-watch position that addresses this issue. We believe that the whole discussion is going to drag on and on. It's in square brackets right now. And the polluting nations, the rich nations are not ready. They're not really ready to pay because they don't want to accept responsibility. But they spend over $2 trillion every year in warfare and armament. And if they could just think about respecting the rights of Mother Earth, stopping destructive activities, that money could be used as a climate debt to settle the issue rather than talk about loss and damage and never getting to the end of the issue. I think we're going to draw the curtain here. I'm looking at the panel. Somebody has something hot, burning to say? Yes, please.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we feel that COP is lost and damaged is because of the access issue. That's one of the other reasons. Currently, the politicians are having a conversation with the fossil lobbyists, but affected communities are actually not having the access that they need to be in the negotiating table together. You know, that on its own, from us in South Africa, we have a very bad experience of politicians and as well as the private sector because of the corruption issue. You know, so you can imagine what outcomes would be if politicians are only having a conversation with the private sector, who are actually pushing for their own agenda to ensure that fossil fuel continue to be there, you know, to be utilized or to take place in the African region. So it's a loss and damage because we are here as if now we are going to rubber stamp or to do a face presentation. So we actually require to be part of the negotiation space in order for the climate lobbies to also hear our concerns, to hear the concerns of affected communities.
Thank you so much, Tabo. And I want to thank you all for coming for this event. And let me just lift this up. We have a new book just off the press about Nkama from a Big Trouble. It's about stories, short story fiction, about animals talking about how climate change affects them. And we believe strongly that if animals had delegates in the COP, the discussion would not be what it is now. We will be more respectful of communities, of environment, and of other living beings. Thank you so much for being here. The struggle continues.
The speakers to receive inputs on the results of your consultation with the presidency on the contact group and what it means for us to just have informal consultations, because it is a little confusing despite the many years that we've been here. Thank you, Madam Co-Facilitator.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your encouraging words and also your optimism. I like that. And with this, seeing no more flags, I would end the session and thank you again for your patience and for taking a bit more of your time. Thank you.
It's the world's most witnessed event. The Mother of the World invites you to confront together the climate crisis. Efforts united in fulfilling global goals. Solutions for the world's most pressing challenges. COP27, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, 2022.
Activate the environment to enable them to do restoration. Now, the private sector should, in a large way, consider investing in nature-based enterprises that actually motivate or incentivize farmers to restore and that give them a fair return on investment. Because when there is a fair return on investment, farmers will be intentional to restore. The other thing is that governments should provide a good policy environment that supports restoration. Sometimes when farmers want to restore and the policy environment obstructs them, they do not get the motivation to put their time, energy, and effort. Women, again, and youth should really be heavily involved in the designing of programs. When they are excluded in the designing of programs for restoration, their interests are not met, yet their energy, their time, their knowledge is really at the center of successful restoration programs. So when we also consider or prioritize innovative models that are more community-driven, that also leverage on local knowledge, because a lot of communities have very rich knowledge on what can work for their context. When this local knowledge is not invested in, and more of what we do is to bring external knowledge and imagine that that is what is going to work, it does not necessarily work. Water is also a key investment. In the drylands, water is one of the challenges for restoration. If we do not invest in ensuring that we can have water that allows restoration to happen, we will really put communities still at the struggling front.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Belen, just to wrap up with this session now, I'm very curious. You presented a fantastic case of, from the Amazon on how, indigenous people are part of the area of protection, part of the process of protection of this region. I think, what key lessons would you summarize for us in other areas, for instance, in the Congo Basin? We have also huge areas that are in need of protection, and there are indigenous people there. What would be your 3 key takeaways when we want to sort of work with indigenous people in other areas in terms of what we should be considering in protected areas?
Well, in order to achieve what we call in the region well-being, live in harmony with nature, definitely indigenous people must achieve funds for do what we call bioeconomy. We really believe in the power of the bioeconomy. There are several value chains that indigenous people are working in right now, as vanilla, morete, and other fruits from the forest. And they are now strengthening the value chain in order to export it. So that's important also to have enough support from the government, from local governments, from universities. So there is like a multi-level stakeholders programs that will support indigenous people to be successful on bioeconomy, and also will be an income for the states. Definitely, it's very important to fulfill all the requirements and implement collective rights, land tenuring, respect indigenous people's rights, and really have a deep conversation in our countries to see how we transit in an ecological pathway that will allow us to go from oil and mining countries that will expand over the next 10 years, a new model of economy that will be based on nature, water, and biodiversity. So for the region, it's critical to count with a very ethical and transparent voluntary carbon market projects that will allow also to have these investments to protect and restore the Amazon.
Brilliant. And I love the idea of bioeconomy. I've been listening a lot to presentations from the Brazilian Amazon, and I'm reflecting on the potential to think around the bioeconomy in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Congo Basin, in the Sahel, where we have valuable products such as the shea butter, the moringa, the baobab, that are really used internationally for, for our beauty products that are absolutely organic from the trees. They will help women build their economic base, and really seeing that huge potential to work within value chains that can help us protect and restore nature, but also really drive economic benefits in the hands of local communities, and particularly women that are used in valorizing this bioeconomy. So I've been very excited, listening to the Brazilian side, and I think there's so much that we can learn. Well, allow me to sum up this session. I promise you it's going to be short and sweet. We've had fantastic contributions on how we can really make landscape restoration, forest protection, both benefit people as well as biodiversity and our climate, from lessons from Irene, and be able to ensure that we have justice in the process by ensuring we have local benefits as well as securing rights. We've heard from a young entrepreneur there that is combining different kind of, a business model with social and environmental impacts, working with smallholder farmers in Ghana, and fantastic lessons there in terms of working with indigenous people, building bioeconomy, securing rights, and ensuring that we are really working together as a team. So thank you so much, everybody, and please give a loud of applause to our participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, and all the panelists. I think most of you probably have been in many problem-solving workshops. Yeah, raise your hand if you have been in problem-solving workshops. Yeah, I see many hands up. So a technique that is used in problem-solving
the articles of the Paris Agreement that has been a huge contentious space for our people. This article was to negotiate market mitigation mechanisms. And first of all, market-based solutions do not work for our communities. We do not want to commodify Mother Earth, commodify the sacred, commodify the air, or our lands and territories that are now being wrapped up in things being coined as nature-based solutions. This further entrenches our lands and territories to be commodified and put up for grabs and further appropriated from our people. As Indigenous peoples, we have advocated for the advancement of non-market solutions within Article 4, and we have been advocating for that since the inception of the Paris Agreement. However, we have to recognize that the negotiations continue to fall short. Regardless of the fact that the preamble of Article 6 includes recognition of Indigenous rights, there have been weak commitments and language to actually back that. The Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change collectively urges the draft text to be sent back to the supervisory body for further work. We acknowledge that there has been progress so far. However, we support that the
It implicates ourselves, and I'll start there first, because in the spirit of trust and transparency, we need to do more as well. So we have also committed to incorporating climate risk into all of our programs at the International Committee of the Red Cross. But in this paper, we address how we need to work in complementarity with other sectors, with the DRR community, with the climate community, with the funds, with the MDBs, to help them sharpen their conflict analysis. Because we have the access to places that they often don't, that their risk aversity will mean that they cannot get to. So we need to work better in that sense, possibly also then through sequencing our action so that our action enables them to come in and work in a manner that gives them a bit more comfort. Our ask to them, to policymakers, those who make the decisions for the boards, for the MDBs, and for their own national development agencies, is to address this issue of risk appetite. Because you're not going to be able to have the same kind of program with the same kind of fiduciary requirements and accountability requirements operating in a conflict setting than you do in a peaceful, stable setting. So address that. We can help you. We're not kamikaze people running around in conflict. We assess our own risk and we manage the risk. So yes, we do take more risk, but it is not inconceivable that others can as well. We address silos. There are many wonderful organizations doing work in fragile and conflict-affected settings and also on climate action, but those teams need to better talk to each other. So we are suggesting that that is possible, and we're already beginning to see it. Complementarity I've already spoken to. That was something that we wanted to put on ourselves as well. And then there's the important question of scale, which was also addressed in the earlier session by IFAD. As much as we are pushing for the doubling of adaptation globally, and that will require major investments in big projects, in the places that we work, often it means working at the community level. And the way that projects are structured to work at local level has to be different. It's a different kind of accompaniment. And you have to find different ways of involving local communities. The national societies of the Red Cross movement, who are there, who are staying, who are voluntary people in their communities finding ways to act. That's our call to policymakers, and that's where we think we must all start action and learn by doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita. Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And congratulations to all of you who have found the way. You must have an extraordinary sense of orientation. This is my 15th COP, and I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm getting angrier every single time I'm coming to the COP. We know for 27 years now for certain what's going to happen. We have been unable to reduce the emissions. The Guardian 2 days ago just wrote it's the highest emission ever, and what we are seeing and what we are witnessing is this is not a number, this is causing human suffering every single day. I'm personally happy that we are now finally speaking about climate justice as one of the core drivers, and it's so obvious that climate change is not only an environmental but a human and a deep question of ethics and moral. And also, as UN organization, we are committed to the Sustainable Development Goals. And in 2015, to me, the most noble Sustainable Development Goal accepted was SDG 2, zero hunger by 2030. And now look at the numbers. 2019, we had 135 million who were so acutely food insecure that they needed organizations like the World Food Programme to help them. December last year, 276 million. And that was at this point where we already spoke about the biggest humanitarian crisis since Second World War. And now today, with the war on Ukraine, 345 million people. But if this number is not shocking enough, it's in 82 countries. And we see that it's particularly the people in most fragile contexts who are suffering most. We have heard the numbers. If you are lucky, as you know, many in this room are, and you live in a rich country, your country is spending 80 times the money on your climate resilience than if you are already in a fragile context. What we are trying to say and what we are doing is we are starting by the people in the most fragile context, because the underlying spirit of the SDG is to leave no one behind, and that means you start by those in the most fragile context. And it is absolutely doable. It's not even expensive if we had a bit more money. I want to give you some examples of what is possible with, from our side, World Food Programme, when you have boots on the ground, which we have. In Somalia, for example, we are seeing the worst drought in 4 decades. This is not coming overnight. We knew this is coming, and we were able to inform 1.2 million people ahead of time that this is not going to go away, so you can prepare. And with the funding we had, of course not enough, but at least for a fraction, we could transfer cash to 117,000 people so they could prepare and stock up for the drought to come. This is, and it's unnecessary to say, infinitely cheaper than coming in when the drought is already there and when people are suffering and struggling for their survival. The money ultimately is there, but it's often coming too late. And if you are able to get the money in so you can anticipate the crisis and provide people with the tools that they need to adapt to the crisis before it hits hardest, your money is more wisely spent. You know, And I have an example from Yemen, where a flash flood destroyed lives and livelihoods and houses. When we are coming in, we can work with the local community. Of course, the local community wants to rebuild these houses. So if we connect food and assets for work that people put in to restore their own livelihoods, that is a very powerful tool, and it helps people also to regain hope in a complicated situation. Now let's just pass this chat and I continue. The magnitude of what's happening is also something that we see in payouts from insurance. WFP recently did the largest payout with the African risk capacity, $7.1 million paid out in Mali as trigger points were achieved. I want to conclude by saying two things. The World Food Programme is still conceived by many as something like a humanitarian united parcel service. You put money in and you get food delivered on the other side. Of course we are saving lives, we are doing that on a daily basis, but we are telling all of our donors that changing lives is so important because we need to build long-term resilience. And if we are doing things like nature-based solutions, restoring soils, making barren land arable again, it's not only that we are enabling people to rebuild their own livelihoods, to get their 2 feet back on the ground and regain their dignity, it's also that they provide services to all of us. Because every piece of land that's working again, every functioning ecosystem, every agroforestry system ultimately takes out carbon out of the atmosphere and helps all of us. But our starting point should be, we are committed to zero hunger, we are committed to leaving no one behind, and we need much, much more support in order to be able to help those who are in most fragile context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and to all of our speakers. We now have a few minutes for questions. If we have any questions, either in the room or online. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm a volunteer for the Climate Fresque Association that built an education tool around climate awareness that has just been adopted by the French government to train the 25,000 high public officials. And so I have a question that's twofold. So this question you're raising here, the issue that the World Food Programme is raising here about getting finance and getting support for the populations that are more at risk, also comes with a prerequisite that the people that you're asking finance from also understand this cause. Because as we know, as humans from experience, when this is away from the eyes and it's away from the cart, we don't care. So I would like to ask, my twofold question is, towards the people or towards the organizations or the countries where you are looking for funding, how are you looking towards their education towards climate? Do you have any specific tools towards this? And also regarding to the comment that I believe the Secretary General of Mali made, that it's much cheaper to give climate awareness education to the local communities. I believe you said the ratio from $1 to $7 in terms of savings if they had climate education. So even there, is there any simple tool that at this point you use that can be used more democratically or more democratized, I would say, to help with your targets, or say, or putting it another way, to enable your own efforts? Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps Martin, you'd like to respond to the first half, and then Nahum to the second half. But others, please do come in.
Yeah. Climate awareness, climate education, absolutely. On the donor side, I happen to sit in Berlin. Germany is our second largest donor after the United States. I'm dealing with a government that said in the government declaration to start with, climate justice is what we want to achieve. So here I'm dealing with a government that really understands and is committed to fix these issues. On the community side, you're absolutely right. It's adaptation starts and resilience building by working with local population and telling them what's happening. I mentioned the ARC replica, the African risk capacity. One of the things here is to discuss with local population trigger points for the payout of the insurance. And that very discussion about, what is our risk, how high is it, where can you build a house, where not, how do we anticipate a disaster, is an incredibly powerful instrument, even without paying $1 in insurance payouts, to make people aware that climate change is happening and that they have to brace for impact. And thank you for your offer. This is something we can follow up after the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, in terms of tools, one of the tools I just mentioned was the FBF, which is called now FBA, which is forecast-based action or forecast-based financing. But what is good about that approach is that communities are put in the center of the resilience. They are put in the center of how to tackle the issue regarding the disaster. We don't just rush when disaster happens. We anticipate disaster. We make sure that the population, they know what are the risks in their communities. We do assess the risk, the different risks in their communities, and from those risks we choose the one which are most likely to happen in the communities, and we decide with them, they decide actually how to prevent, not to prevent, but how to anticipate those disasters. And by doing that, we proposition kits. We also work with this community because we have volunteers in those communities. Our volunteers are from the communities, actually. So those volunteers, they work to raise awareness, climate awareness, and they also, what we do is that we also work with the meteorological services, the scientific, the meteorological services, the hydrological services, and the early warning system to come up with threshold and triggers whereby, for example, the meteorological service will tell us, okay, in 4 days or in 3 days, there is going to be a rain of this intensity. And we know from experience that if that happens, then there's going to be flood. And if there's going to flood, are the population already prepared for that? That's how we do it. They are already prepared because we provide them with sandbags. They know the area that is likely to be flooded, and they will work to build dikes. They will also work to know how to evacuate people and their animals. And once it's happened, then they're already prepared, and they do that. And the impact of that disaster, even though we can prevent it from happening, but the impact will be less on lives and also on livelihoods. So these are one of the tools, but it's difficult today to raise money for anticipation because people will rush to bring money when the disaster happens. But to tell, okay, we're going to anticipate disaster, it's very difficult to raise money for that, to mobilize money for that. And the other things that we're doing is the climate smart activities that we do with the communities, which enables them, to come up with basic actions that will enable them to face the difficulties that they have in terms of climate and desertification.
Thank you. Michelle, did you want to add something?
Yes, thank you. Going back to the point around, so thank you for asking the question actually about raising climate awareness in education. And last night, in fact, here yesterday evening, we had some really powerful testimonies, and I wish they were with me here. We had some refugees and IDPs speaking directly on the importance of climate awareness in education. We had Assad, a young child refugee from Sudan, talking about how his family had been hit by the floods, and his heartfelt call to enable the access of children to education as their right around the world. We heard from Iman, from a woman from Yemen, who is an extraordinary woman leading a project bringing solar energy into refugee settings and demonstrating how she explained herself how that awareness, that education that she's had and that she's using to support other women in her community to bring them out of their homes is actually really empowering them, not as jargon, in the true sense, really empowering them, and that is resilience. and also from Opira, who joined us online, in fact, from Uganda, a refugee originally from South Sudan, who is a young climate activist who's doing extraordinary work as a mobilizer in his community, where they've brought together, created his own organization with other refugees, other community members, and they're planting trees. So showing how his awareness that he spoke very eloquently to how his own